My name is Rabbi David, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been deeply rooted in faith. I've devoted my days, my energy, and my very soul to serving God and guiding those who seek wisdom. As a spiritual leader, my purpose has always been clear: to uplift my community and remind them of the eternal truths found in the Torah. For decades, I believed my faith was unshakable, my understanding of God solid. But life, as it often does, has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. I was born into a devout family where God's presence was felt in every moment. My earliest memories are of my grandfather, a man of immense faith, telling me stories of the great prophets, Moses parting the Red Sea, Elijah calling fire from heaven. I hung on every word, feeling a deep connection to these stories of unwavering trust in God. By the time I was a young man, I knew my path was set. I was going to dedicate my life to God, study His Word, and guide others in walking His path. Becoming a rabbi felt as natural as breathing. I immersed myself in the Torah, finding joy in uncovering its wisdom and sharing it with others. For decades, I led prayers, taught scripture, and delivered sermons to my congregation. I was there for them in their happiest moments and their darkest days, officiating weddings, naming newborns, sitting beside them in hospitals, and mourning with them at funerals. These weren't just duties to me. They were sacred acts, opportunities to serve God by serving His people. Each day began the same way. Before the sun rose, I would wrap myself in my tallit, recite the morning blessings, and feel the words connect me to generations of Jews before me. Leading services and teaching Torah brought me the greatest joy. When I saw the light of understanding in someone's eyes or heard the heartfelt thanks of someone I had counseled, I felt a deep sense of purpose. My faith wasn't just something I practiced, it was who I was. But even the most steadfast faith is not immune to the tests of life. It began with a nagging fatigue, the kind you brush off as part of getting older or working too hard. I told myself it was nothing. After all, the work of a rabbi is never done, and I'd learned to push through exhaustion. But then came the ache in my stomach. At first, it was dull, but soon it became sharper and more persistent. I tried to ignore it, to pray through it, but it didn't go away. My wife, Miriam, noticed. She's always been my anchor, and when she insisted I see a doctor, I finally agreed, more to ease her worry than because I truly believed something was wrong. I remember the day of the diagnosis as if it were yesterday. Sitting in the doctor's office, I heard the words, but they didn't feel real. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The words echoed in my mind, heavy and unrelenting. For a moment, I felt the ground beneath me give way. I thought of the families in my congregation who had faced similar news and how I had comforted them with words of faith. Now those words felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. As Miriam and I left the doctor's office, I could see the worry etched into her face. She didn't say much, and neither did I. What was there to say? But as the reality of my situation sank in, I made a decision. I would face this trial the same way I had faced every other challenge in my life, with faith. I prayed for strength, for understanding, and for the courage to walk this path, no matter how difficult it might become. The treatments began soon after, and chemotherapy was grueling, far worse than I had imagined. The nausea, the weakness, it felt as if my body was betraying me. Yet I held on to my faith, turning to God in prayer, even in my weakest moments. When I couldn't sleep at night, I would recite verses from the Psalms, finding solace in words that reminded me of God's presence, even in the valley of the shadow of death. Still, there were moments of doubt. Lying awake in the quiet hours of the night, I would ask myself questions I never thought I would. Why is this happening to me? Had I failed in some way? But I always came back to the stories of the prophets, of Job and his unwavering trust in God, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. I told myself that this was my test, my moment to prove the strength of my faith. But despite my resolve, the illness took its toll. My body grew weaker with each passing day. There were moments when I could barely stand, and even the simplest tasks felt insurmountable. My family, ever supportive, tried to lift my spirits, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Miriam, my rock, would sit by my side, holding my hand, her quiet strength reminding me that I was not alone. Then came the night everything changed. I had just returned home after another exhausting treatment, barely able to make it to my chair. The ache in my stomach was unbearable, but something else was happening. A tightness in my chest, sharp and unrelenting, began to take hold. I tried to call out to Miriam, but the words wouldn't come. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into darkness. That's when it happened. A moment that would alter everything I thought I knew. But that, I would later realize, is a story for another time. That night felt different, as though a storm was brewing inside me that I couldn't control. The pain in my stomach was sharper than ever before, and the tightness in my chest made it hard to breathe. I'd grown accustomed to the constant discomfort over the past months, but this was different, more intense, more final. Miriam sat close, her eyes filled with worry as she held my hand. "Let me call the doctor," she pleaded. I shook my head. I didn't want to spend another night in a hospital room. I just wanted to be home, surrounded by the things that reminded me of life, of purpose. My children were in the next room whispering among themselves. I could hear the worry in their voices, though they tried to hide it. They had seen me grow weaker with each passing day, my once steady hands now trembling, my voice a shadow of its former strength. I hated seeing the fear in their eyes, the way they looked at me as if I was slipping away. But deep down, I knew they weren't wrong. As the hours passed, the pain became unbearable. I tried to pray, to focus on the words that had always brought me comfort, but my mind was clouded by the agony coursing through my body. "God," I whispered, "if this is my time, give me the strength to face it." I clung to my faith, though it felt like holding onto a rope fraying at the edges. The tightness in my chest intensified, and my breathing became shallow. Miriam's voice broke through the fog. "David, stay with me," she cried, panic rising in her tone. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. My vision blurred, and the room around me began to fade. The last thing I saw was Miriam's face, her tears falling as she called my name. Then there was nothing, or so I thought. When I opened my eyes, or at least what I thought were my eyes, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it, looking down at the scene unfolding below. Miriam was on the floor beside me, shaking my shoulders. Her cries were filled with desperation. My children had rushed into the room, their faces pale as they frantically called for an ambulance. I saw myself lying there, motionless, my chest eerily still. It was a strange sight, seeing my own body as though it belonged to someone else. I should have felt fear or panic, but instead I felt an odd calmness. There was no pain, no heaviness, just a lightness, as if I had been freed from the weight of the world. I tried to speak, to tell them I was still here, but no sound came out. I reached out toward Miriam, but my hand passed through her as if I were made of air. It was then that I realized I was no longer tethered to the life I had known. The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent as they worked to revive me. The scene below was chaotic. Miriam sobbing, my children huddled together, the medics shouting commands. But it all felt distant, as though I were watching it through a pane of glass. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them I wasn't gone, but I was powerless to do so. I was a silent observer, caught between two worlds. Then, something shifted. The room grew brighter. Not from the overhead lights, but from a faint glow in the distance. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the flicker of a candle, but the light grew steadily, gradually illuminating everything around me. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but warm, gentle, as if it were alive, pulsing softly in a way that felt natural. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. It was as if the light was calling to me, inviting me to come closer. As I drifted toward it, the sounds of the room below began to fade. The voices of the paramedics, Miriam's sobs, the beeping of the machines. All of it dissolved into a soft hum. The light seemed to wrap around me, enveloping me in warmth that was both comforting and overwhelming. For a moment I hesitated, unsure of what lay ahead. Was this death? Was this the presence of God I had often spoken about? I didn't know, but I couldn't resist the pull. It was as if every part of me was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. Just as I began to surrender to the light, I heard something. A faint sound at first, but growing clearer. Familiar voices, softly and lovingly calling my name. One was my mother's voice, the same voice that had sung me to sleep as a child. Another was my father's, reciting a prayer I hadn't heard in decades. Their voices stirred something deep inside me, longing, a sense of home. The pull of the light grew stronger, and I moved closer, feeling no fear, only quiet anticipation. I didn't know what awaited me, but it felt like I was on the brink of something profound. As the voices grew louder, the light expanded, enveloping everything in its warm glow. Just as I felt myself crossing into its embrace, everything around me shifted once again. What lay ahead I could never have imagined, not even in my wildest dreams. As I moved deeper into the light, a warmth unlike anything I had ever known wrapped around me. Not just physical warmth, but something that touched my very soul. It was peace, love, emotions that words could never fully capture. The light pulsed gently, as if it were breathing, and for the first time in what felt like eternity I was free from pain, from worry, from the weight of the world. It felt like I was being welcomed home, embraced by something far greater than myself. Then, the light began to shift. Images started to appear, not in front of me, but within the light itself, like it held the story of my life. I saw myself as a young boy, running through the fields near my childhood home, carefree and full of wonder. I heard my mother's laughter as she called me inside for dinner, her voice filled with a love that stays with you forever. The image shifted, and I saw myself, as a teenager, poring over the Torah, my father's proud smile as he watched me. It was as if the light was showing me the moments that had shaped me, the foundation of my faith. The scenes came faster now, my ordination as a rabbi, the first sermon I delivered to my congregation, the tears of gratitude from a family I had counseled through grief. I saw the faces of people I had helped over the years, expressions of relief, of hope. Each moment felt alive, as if I were reliving it, and with every image I felt a reaffirmation of the life I had dedicated to God. But then, the atmosphere began to shift. The warmth of the light faded, replaced by a chill that crept into the air. The vibrant glow dimmed, and the comforting hum that had surrounded me was replaced by an eerie silence. A knot formed in my stomach, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The images in the light shifted too, becoming less vibrant, their colors muted, their life fading. Something was wrong, but I couldn't understand what. As the light dimmed further, the silence was broken by a faint sound at first, a whisper, then a low, anguished moan. It grew louder until it filled the space around me, becoming a chorus of cries. I turned, searching for the source, and what I saw shook me to my core. Shapes began to emerge from the dimness, figures rising in pain, their faces contorted in agony. Men, women, even children, crying out in torment. Their cries pierced through me like a blade. They reached out their hands, clawing at the air as if begging. Their voices echoed in a symphony of despair, each cry a plea for help. I wanted to look away, to escape from the agony unfolding before me, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the suffering that felt so real and tangible. It was as if their pain had become my own, suffocating and inescapable. The cries pierced me, not just in my ears but deep into my soul. I had spent my life teaching about God's mercy and justice, but in this place those teachings felt distant and hollow. How could such suffering exist in the presence of a just and loving God? I tried to pray, to recite the words that had always comforted me, but they wouldn't come. My mind was filled with questions and doubts I had never expected to face. Who were these people? Why were they here? Was this some kind of judgment? The cries grew louder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I had spent my life guiding others, offering wisdom and solace, but in this moment I had no answers. I was lost, unable to offer comfort, lost in a sea of uncertainty. And then cutting through the chaos I heard a voice. It was deep, resonant, and unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't angry, but it carried a weight, a power that silenced everything around it. "David," the voice said, calling me by name. It was calm, yet commanding, and as it spoke, the cries of anguish faded into the background. I turned toward the source of the voice, my heart pounding. The suffering figures seemed to dissolve, leaving me alone in a vast, empty void. The air grew thick with anticipation, as if the entire universe itself was holding its breath. I didn't know who or what was speaking to me, but I felt deep in my soul that this moment was unlike any other. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. I would never be the same. The voice called my name again, resonating with a power that penetrated every fiber of my being. "David," it said, not in anger, but with a weight that demanded my full attention. "Who is God?" The question struck me like lightning, and for a moment I was stunned. "Who is God?" I repeated, almost instinctively. The answer should have come easily. I had spent my life teaching others about God, studying the Torah, praying to the Creator. Yet in that moment, the words felt elusive, hollow. The voice asked again, its tone calm but insistent, "Have you truly known me?" The question echoed through the silence, reverberating in my mind. My thoughts raced, grasping for the certainty I thought I had. Of course, I knew God. I prayed to Him every day, studied His Word, devoted my life to serving Him. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had taken for granted. This wasn't about rituals or teachings, it was about understanding. And in that moment I wasn't sure I truly understood Him. As I stood there, the darkness around me began to shift, as if the voice had unlocked something within me. The void began to fill with visions, scenes that blurred the boundaries of time and belief. I saw Abraham on Mount Moriah, his hand trembling as he prepared to sacrifice Isaac, his faith unwavering. I saw Moses on Mount Sinai, the tablets of the covenant glowing with divine fire, moments I had known my whole life, preached about with conviction. But then, the visions began to change. I saw a man I didn't recognize, walking along a dusty road, his face radiant with peace and purpose. He was surrounded by fishermen, laborers, women and children, all hanging on his every word. His voice carried a power that stirred something deep within me, even though I couldn't hear the words. Who was this man? He wasn't part of the stories I had taught, but he felt undeniably familiar. The scenes shifted again, showing this man performing acts that defied logic. I watched as he touched the eyes of a blind man and the man's face lit up in astonishment as his sight was restored. I saw him kneeling beside a crippled man, lifting him to his feet, and the man walked with strength that seemed impossible. These were not the miracles of Moses or Elijah. They were something different, something personal. The vision grew brighter, and I saw the man standing before a great crowd, his voice ringing out with authority. "I am the way, the truth, and the—" His words hit me like a tidal wave. "No one comes to the Father except through me." The meaning was undeniable, and as unsettling as it was clear. This was Jesus, the figure I had only known through distant accounts, filtered through skepticism and theological boundaries, now standing before me in unmistakable clarity. As the visions continued, they began to merge, blending the Torah with the New Testament in ways that overwhelmed me. I saw Moses receiving the commandments, the stone tablets glowing with divine authority. And then, in the same vision, I saw Jesus breaking bread, offering it to his followers. "This is my body, given for you," he said. The connections were dizzying, as though two separate stories were weaving together right before my eyes. I struggled to comprehend what I was witnessing, but then I heard the voice again, this time close, almost as though it was coming from within me. "David, you have spent your life seeking me, but have you truly found me?" Tears began to flow down my face. "I have tried," I whispered. "I thought I understood, but now I don't know." The visions faded, replaced by a blinding light, and from within it, a figure emerged. It was Jesus, the same man I had seen in the visions. His presence wasn't overwhelming in power, but in compassion. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a depth of love that I couldn't begin to understand. He didn't need to speak for me to feel the weight of his presence, but when he did, his words carried a clarity and authority that left no room for doubt. "David," he said gently but firmly, "you have known the law and the prophets, but the fullness of truth is before you now. I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. You have sought God in the commandments, and they are good, but the path to the Father is through me." I fell to my knees, unable to bear the weight of his words. They weren't a condemnation, but an invitation. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why now?" Jesus stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because you have the courage to ask, to seek beyond what you know. That is the first step toward truth." He paused, his expression softening. "David, what you have taught and believed has not been in vain. Your devotion has brought you here, but there is more to know. The question is, will you have the courage to follow where I lead?" The light around him seemed to pulse, as if waiting for my response. I was overwhelmed, my heart and mind wrestling with the profound implications of what I had just seen and heard. Before I could respond, he spoke one last time. "Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened." With that, the light intensified, and the vision began to fade, leaving me with his words echoing in my mind. Their meaning was both clear and vast, so vast I couldn't fully grasp it. Whatever came next, I knew my life would never be the same. The return to my body was abrupt, almost violent. One moment I was surrounded by light, bathed in truth and love, and the next I was gasping for air. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights flooded my eyes. My chest felt heavy, my limbs weak, and the sharp beeping of monitors filled the room. I heard voices, urgent, relieved, coming from the doctors and nurses around me. "He's back," someone said. Miriam's face appeared above me, her eyes swollen from crying. She grabbed my hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. I had survived. But as I lay there, trying to process what had happened, I realized that survived wasn't the right word. I had been somewhere else, somewhere beyond this world, and the weight of that experience was overwhelming. The hospital became my home for the next few days as the medical team monitored my condition. They were baffled by my recovery, given how close I had been to death. But for me, the physical healing was secondary. What consumed me was the storm raging in my soul, the vision, the voice, the encounter with Jesus. They felt more real than anything I had ever known, but they also left me with more questions than answers. At first, I tried to bury it. I returned to my prayers, reciting the words I had always known. But they felt different now, hollow, almost unfamiliar. The teachings I had devoted my life to no longer seemed complete. It felt like something was missing, like a vital piece was out of place. I wanted to dismiss the vision, to write it off as a trick of a dying mind, but I couldn't. Jesus' words, "Seek and you will find," kept resurfacing, pulling at the edges of my faith. I kept it all to myself, not telling anyone, not even Miriam. How could I explain what I had experienced without shattering everything I had spent my life building? So I wrestled with it alone, turning to the Torah, trying to find answers. But the more I searched, the more I realized that the questions I was asking couldn't be answered by the texts I had always relied on. One day, while out on a walk to clear my head, I passed a small church. Something about it caught my attention. The doors were open, and I could hear quiet singing drifting out. I hesitated, feeling out of place, but the pull I had felt in the vision returned, urging me forward. I stepped inside, and an older man in clerical robes greeted me warmly. He introduced himself as Pastor Thomas and invited me to sit. Before I knew it, I was pouring out my story to him, about the illness, the vision, the voice, and my encounter with Jesus. He listened patiently, his face showing quiet understanding. When I finished, he handed me a Bible. "You've been given a gift," he said gently. "It's not an easy path, but truth really is. Perhaps this will help." At first I was hesitant to open the book. It felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory, like crossing a line. But one night, unable to sleep, I picked it up. The words felt foreign, yet strangely familiar, resonating with the same authority and compassion I had felt in the vision. As I read about Jesus' life and teachings, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. His words about love, grace, and truth spoke directly to my heart, answering questions I hadn't even realized I was asking. The turning point came when Pastor Thomas invited me to a Bible study group. I was nervous, unsure of how I would be received, but the group welcomed me with open arms. For the first time, I felt free to ask the questions that had been consuming me. Their responses were thoughtful, patient, and filled with a love that mirrored the presence I had felt in the vision. As the weeks passed, my heart began to change. The doubts that had weighed me down started to lift, replaced by a sense of peace I had never known. The teachings of Jesus didn't conflict with my understanding of God. They completed it. The day I decided to follow him was both the hardest and the most liberating day of my life. When I told my family, their reactions were mixed. Miriam was devastated, struggling to understand how I could leave behind the faith we had shared for so long. My children were confused, asking the same questions I had once asked. It was painful, but I knew I couldn't turn back. I prayed for their understanding, trusting that God would work in their hearts as he had in mine. Today, my life looks very different from what it once was. I still carry the lessons of the Torah with me, but now they are illuminated by the light of Jesus' teachings. I share my story not to convince anyone, but to testify to the transformation that is possible when we seek truth with open hearts. If my story has resonated with you, I encourage you to comment your name below so we can pray for you. Each of us is on a journey, and prayer is a powerful way to find guidance and strength. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more incredible stories of near-death experiences, check out the videos on the screen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. May you find peace and truth on your journey.